It's finally here, NBA Draft Day 2022. Final thoughts as we roll into this year's NBA Draft. Could the Rockets be lining up a draft night trade for one Eric Gordon to either the Phoenix Suns or possibly the Philadelphia 76ers? And hey, John Wall opting into the final year of his contract. What does that timeline look like as far as a potential buyout for him and his remaining days as a Houston Rocket? All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. Man, it is finally here, NBA Draft Day 2022. We are just mere hours away from finding out what the Houston Rockets are going to accomplish in this year's NBA draft. And hey, there's a lot of nerve-wracking tension rolling into the draft because it looks like, based on all the betting odds around the board, Paolo Banchero suddenly sneaking up to be the favorite at multiple sports books to go number one overall in this year's draft. So what could that possibly mean? We'll also take a look at the prospective interest from the Phoenix Suns and the Philadelphia 76ers in one Eric Gordon. And then we'll round things out talking about John Wall opting into the final year of his deal, as you know, to be expected, what that looks like, what a possible buyout looks like, what the timeline for the Rockets looks like, how he impacts that timeline and his final days as a Houston Rocket. So let's start with the big piece of information here, and that's the concern over Paolo Banchero's odds shifting so just insanely over the last week, over the last few days, to now be rivaling Jabari Smith Jr. as the favorite to go number one overall in this year's draft. And the way that I see it, there's a few different interpretations that could be the reason for this happening, right? So the easiest one is just that the Orlando Magic are poised to potentially take Paolo Banchero number one overall. I will push back on that one because ultimately we haven't heard anything from legitimate NBA newsbreakers like Shams Charania or Adrian Wojnarowski about the dynamic shifting at the top of this year's draft. In fact, during the ESPN kind of draft special, Woj basically said, no, the impression that I have with the feeling is it's going to go, it's going to be Jabari, then Chet, then Paolo Banchero to Houston. And, Houston has not hidden the fact that they are incredibly excited by the prospect of Paolo Banchero in a Rockets jersey. They've been pretty, I can't say blatantly upfront about it, but it's no secret now. Houston is incredibly attracted by, Paolo Banchero. They want him in Houston. So could it be that OKC and Orlando are trying to, angle and smokescreen and maneuver their way into forcing Houston to give up a little bit of extra draft capital to be able to get their guy, quote unquote? Maybe, but, at what cost? Would you really, if you were OKC or Orlando, would you really draft a guy that you didn't think was number one on your board just to spite Houston or just to try to angle and finesse for an extra asset down the line? That seems, incredulous to me. So I'm not going to buy into that. However, pardon me, I think it also could potentially mean that the Rockets were rumored to potentially be trading up in this year's draft to either one or two to absolutely secure that they would get Paolo Banchero. Now, based on the intel that we have, right, it doesn't exactly make a ton of sense to trade up if you really think that Banchero is going to be there at 3. Why burn the additional asset or two to try and, move up one spot or even 2 spots to guarantee you get your guy? I kind of don't buy into that one either. It doesn't make a whole ton of sense to me, especially if all signs are pointing towards Jabari at 1 to the Magic and then Chet at number 2 to the Thunder. Unless you were legitimately concerned about the Thunder stepping in there at number 2 and deciding to go Paolo Banchero, which there has been enough smoke, and right where there's smoke, there's potentially fire, of the Thunder being interested in the idea of taking Banchero at 2. So maybe this is Rafael Stone trying to sidestep any of those concerns and just guarantee that the Rockets get the guy who is number 1 on their board, even ahead of Jabari, ahead of Chet, and it doesn't matter if he's going to give up an extra asset or 2 to move up to 1 or 2 to guarantee that, because the Rockets have additional assets to work with here. They've got pick number 17. They've got pick number 26 now. So... and they have future assets to work with. So if it means getting the guy that they feel is the most talented, the best prospect player in the draft, then I'm not going to blame them for wanting to potentially trade up and make that happen. However, it could also just be like bad intelligence on the behalf of all the sports betting, sports betting, sports books, sports betting. I'm all over the place. So, right, because at the end of the day, like, there hasn't been any reliable intel from the guys, with the reliable intel like Woj, like Shams, to kind of back up the shift in the numbers. So it could very well just be that the numbers started shifting, people started placing bets, it gained steam, and then all of that just continued to boil over. Now, usually the Vegas money is right. Like, usually I will say, especially around the NBA draft, you follow the Vegas lines. You follow what those lines are saying. Not every sports book has completely shifted. There's a majority of them, though, have tilted to having Paolo Banchero basically right there with the same odds as Jabari Smith Jr. to go number 1 overall. I will say there was one other theory regarding this, last minute hurricane change of pace with the pick odds for who was going to go number 1 overall, and that was that the Rockets have been, this was a great tinfoil hat theory. I don't subscribe to this notion whatsoever. That the Rockets have been leaking information about their desire to draft Paolo Banchero in hopes that one of OKC or Orlando would draft him instead, thereby forcing Jabari or Chet to fall down to number 3. I thought that was an outrageous claim. I thought it was outside of the box and an interesting tinfoil hat theory, but that is absolutely like an insane notion that the Rockets would try to manipulate the process so much to that extent to try and influence another organization's decisions. Plus, other organizations aren't influenced by like other organizational decisions, right? The Rockets may be high on Paolo Banchero. That should not impact what the Magic and the Thunder do. If it does, then they need to have their front offices just completely like wiped out, fire, restarted, because it shouldn't impact another organization what the evaluations internally are for the Houston Rockets. And again, if I don't subscribe to that whatsoever, but it was too good of a theory not to at least lob up here in the show. So to wrap up this very first segment, I will just say, I think that by the end of draft night, or whatever, by the time the 3rd pick is called, Paolo Banchero will be a Houston Rocket. I'm less worried about it than a lot of other people are. I think that at the end of the day, Woj and Shams are so incredibly plugged in that if what they're continuing to hear is Jabari and Chet and then Paolo at number 3 to the Rockets, then I feel like that's going to be the move that shakes out. And even more likely than Orlando or OKC trying to pull the rug out from under the Rockets and going with Banchero at 1 or 2, I think the other scenario of Rafael Stone guaranteeing his selection for his guy by trading up a little bit and enticing one of those other 2 organizations with an asset or 2, I think that is definitely a more likely outcome and move at this point based on all the intelligence that we have, rather than one of Orlando or OKC suddenly shifting their priorities from the 2 targets that have been the consensus top 2 guys at the top of this draft with Jabari and Chet. So I think Paolo Banchero is going to be a Houston Rocket. Those are my final 2 cents on him. Coming up, do you want to talk about the Phoenix Suns and the Philadelphia 76ers having some reported interest in Eric Gordon, how that could play into a draft night deal? Going to talk about that in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at Arcade 1 Up. The one, the only NBA Jam is back. Arcade One Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, they've made it bigger and better than ever with a Shaq Edition machine. Look, in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams, no fouls, no free throws, no quarters required, compete with friends and family through all new leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one up.com for an estimated early September shipping date. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $399. Check this out. They are giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number one up.com/lockedon. You've got till July 8th to enter to win an NBA Jam Shaq Edition machine. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, let's talk a little Eric Gordon here. And he's the guy that, to me, is very clearly the next domino to fall if you're the Houston Rockets after the dealing of Christian Wood. Eric Gordon is the next guy that doesn't quite fit the timeline moving forward, doesn't quite fit what the Rockets are doing. Now, yes, he is that veteran presence, that guy that you love to have around these young guys, teaching them how to be quality NBA players, teaching them best, do's and don'ts, that kind of stuff. And I love Eric Gordon for embracing that role here in Houston, which he's absolutely done. He very much has bought into the idea of being a mentor to these young Rockets, especially to that of Jalen Green. And so for that, I'm grateful that he has, committed himself to that role, especially over the course of this past season. But at the end of the day, Eric Gordon rolling into what is essentially the final year of his contract because the 2023-2024 season is non-guaranteed. So he is a hot commodity around the NBA. There's a bit of essentially what looks to be kind of a bidding war as proclaimed by some of the NBA talking heads, top reporters, Brian Windhorst, Adrian Wojnarowski, kind of talking about some of the teams interested in pursuing Eric Gordon. And the two names that have kind of risen to the top of the list as of late are two teams that have ties to Eric Gordon previously, and that's the Phoenix Suns and the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, we know that the Rockets and Suns were potentially tied in some negotiations back during the NBA trade deadline, the fact that the Rockets were trying to pursue a future first-round draft asset. They didn't want additional draft compensation in this year's NBA draft. They wanted a future pick. And the Suns at the NBA trade deadline were reluctant to provide that, which is why Eric Gordon stayed a Houston Rocket. And they just couldn't find a proper deal for Eric Gordon or for Christian Wood at the trade deadline. Christian Wood has now been, moved up I-45 to Dallas. So EG seems to be the next logical domino to fall. And it does seem, based on some reporting from Brian Windhorst, that it does seem that the Phoenix Suns and Philadelphia 76ers are two organizations that are incredibly interested in procuring the services of Eric Gordon. So with that, if you're the Phoenix Suns, first off, obviously there's the ties there with Chris Paul and Eric Gordon. There's also the fact that the Rockets were, trying to see if they could get a deal done previously with the Suns back around the trade deadline, some rumors about that. So it makes all the sense in the world if you're the Phoenix Suns, because this is a team that had a disappointing playoff exit this last go around. Eric Gordon, he's on an expiring deal. He is absolutely a difference maker and can be a difference maker for any team that picks him up. The Suns, if they're willing to part with a future first rounder, would be an ideal landing spot for him. And at this point in time, while I am appreciative of Eric Gordon buying into the veteran leadership role for this Houston Rockets team, I'd much rather see the Rockets procure an additional asset moving forward to help continue to, revitalize this rebuilding process rather than hold on to EG just under the semblance of, oh, he's a vet. There needs to be a vet on the roster. Like, he's good at what he does. Like, I get all that, but at the same time, like, I don't think the veteran leadership that he provides, the mentorship, all of that, right? The off the court, any of that, I don't think that outweighs the ability to procure an additional asset that continues to give you flexibility as you navigate the rebuilding process, or to draft another player further down the line, that kind of thing. Even if it winds up being a later first, because the Phoenix Suns are a talented team and they're going to probably finish with one of the best records in the NBA again next season. I doubt you could get a pick like multiple seasons down the line. That would be just too good to be true. So we're probably looking at a pick from the Suns for next draft, because they don't have a first round pick to deal in this draft. So as far as Phoenix is concerned, I think the fit makes a ton of sense for them. Now, if Phoenix's intent to let DeAndre Ayton walk in free agency, then that maybe changes the calculus on any decisions that they make towards, winning now, because if Robert Sarver is going to cheap out and not retain DeAndre Ayton, then in what world would he also be willing to subsequently let a young, up-and-coming, talented center walk, your first overall pick from a few years back? In what world would he let that player walk and then subsequently pay almost $20 million a year, well, $20 million for this next season, to an older veteran Eric Gordon to then try and pursue a title? Like, who are you going to run at center at that point? I think it's a messy situation in Phoenix right now, so it kind of remains to be seen how they navigate that situation. But EG on the move should be something you keep your eyes on. And then the other rumored suitor is, of course, the Philadelphia 76ers, a team that does have a pick to potentially move in this year's draft. Right now, they can move pick number 23. So would the Rockets be interested in picking up pick number 23? Would they rather push that asset a little bit further out and get a future first from the 76ers? Maybe that's something that's on the table as far as those discussions are concerned. But obviously the connections are there. James Harden, former Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey, and then the 76ers are also rumored to be pursuing aggressively PJ Tucker in free agency to try and reunite him with James Harden and Daryl Morey as well. So it looks like Morey could be potentially trying to get the band all back together, but with a slightly different crew, in the fact that he's got Joel Embiid as the centerpiece, and then he basically throws around the 2018 Houston Rockets around Embiid. So if Daryl Morey is hell-bent on picking up EG services and adding him to that collective of talent that they have over there, then maybe it's just as simple as the Rockets moving EG for the 23rd overall pick and some salary filler. If the Rockets are really able to finesse this trade, if Stone is really able to get creative, then maybe they're able to pick up a future first from the 76ers, either one of their future firsts or potentially a future first from the Brooklyn Nets that the 76ers now own by way of it would have to be a 76er future first. I apologize on that, getting my wires crossed here. Which I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head which future first the 76ers have available. So it might just be this one at 23, and then they might be screwed actually moving forward. I probably should have pulled that up. But either way, the 76ers are interested. And I will say that whether it's the Suns, the 76ers, or a dark horse third team that hasn't even been mentioned yet, the important thing to remember with Eric Gordon and any potential trade that the Rockets consummate regarding him is it's important that the Rockets take back no salary. Because right now, the Rockets are in an incredible position to be poised to make a huge splash in free agency next summer. And that doesn't happen if the Rockets take back long-term bad money, which is one of the wins from the Christian Wood trade, and hopefully will be one of the wins from any potential Eric Gordon trade, is that they do not bring back long-term bad money that will then impact their ability to maneuver with their cap space this upcoming summer. Because as far as the Rockets timeline is concerned, we're kind of seeing the Detroit Pistons make similar levels of moves right now. They just traded Jeremy Grant and they got back a first round draft pick, and that was it. And it's not going to be a great first. So if you're looking at the market, I suppose, and what the Rockets got for Christian Wood, and you're a little disappointed in the return that they got for Christian Wood, the return is fair given what you see Jeremy Grant went for, given kind of where the market is at. It's been a buyer's market for a couple of years now, where good players are being moved for relatively low value. And that's what we saw with Christian Wood. That's just what we saw with Jeremy Grant. And the Pistons are in the same position that the Rockets are in, except for maybe they're doing it about one offseason earlier, is they have now, I think it's like $45 million in cap room off the top of my head, maybe 47. And there's a lot of rumors that they are going to make a pitch and throw throw a max at DeAndre Ayton to be able to pair him with Cade Cunningham, whoever the Pistons draft at number 5, probably Jaden Ivey, and then DeAndre Ayton. That is a insanely talented young core that they've got, also with Sadiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, like everybody that they got over there. The Pistons are suddenly going to be a young, exciting team and have a lot of locked-in pieces for years to come. The Rockets are basically in that same boat, but they are one season removed from that. So I do want to talk about that, kind of what the future holds a little bit, as well as the implications of the John Wall opt-in and how his contract plays a significant role in that timeline. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's talk a little John Wall here and the Rockets kind of rebuilding timeline. And first off, John Wall opting into the final year of his contract. Not a surprise to anybody. Who's going to turn down $47 million? If it had happened, I mean, even the Rockets would have been absolutely flabbergasted had that taken place. So John Wall is locked in for this final year of his deal. And the position that the Rockets find themselves in is that they're, at this point, a trade for John Wall makes no sense, because any trade centered around John Wall, the Rockets would have to take back some level of like 35 something million in salary based on NBA salary matching rules. I'm ballparking. It's somewhere north of 35 probably, or right around that number. And in that case, I am almost 99.9% positive that there's not a team out there that has $35 million of outgoing salary where it's all expiring salary, where it's all going to be gone by the end of this next season. Maybe there is. Maybe I'm completely like jumping the gun here with my hyperbole, but at this point, I see a trade. It's not going to come together for John Wall. He's not going to be traded. He's also still not going to play for the Houston Rockets. So a buyout is the more than likely outcome for him at this point. So what does a buyout potentially look like for John Wall? I'm sure he's been having conversations with other teams. I'm sure his agency has been asking around, trying to figure out if there's any teams out there that have reported interest in pursuing John Wall's services. Now, currently, what's impacting the John Wall market, or potentially going to impact the John Wall market, is Kyrie Irving. Because any team that's looking at adding a veteran guard, adding veteran help, is absolutely going to try and pursue Kyrie Irving first over potentially John Wall, especially because John Wall is still locked into a deal and it would require a buyout for them to be able to pursue him. Now, I will say that the flip side of that is, besides Kyrie Irving and any potential teams, being impacted by their desire, like the Miami Heat were rumored to be interested in John Wall should he receive a contract buyout. The Miami Heat are also rumored to be interested in Kyrie Irving. So if you had to choose between Kyrie and John Wall, you're probably going to go Kyrie Irving, honestly. That said, I will say that I think the way the John Wall situation is going to resolve itself is if there's a team out there that can commit to paying John Wall more than just like the vet minimum. Like if there's a team out there willing to pay him like a $5 million contract or a $10 million contract, or if they have cap space and they want to pay him 15 or 20 right now, we're getting into some unrealistic number territory here for John Wall at 15 or 20 million. But maybe there's a taxpayer MLE out there, or a non-taxpayer MLE that he's willing to sign for like one season with a player option on the second half, just so that he can basically a prove-it deal for John Wall, where he comes in on a team-friendly deal. He's going to take either a backseat role as the backup point guard. He'll come in and immediately jump into a starting spot, and he comes out and he proves, hey, I've still got something left in the tank. I can win at a high level. That's the kind of deal that I think John Wall is going to get post-buyout, and how that impacts the Houston Rockets is whatever level of buyout the Rockets commit to for John Wall is going to be offset by whatever contract he's able to get on the market. So if John Wall gets a contract for $10 million, the Rockets could buy him out of $37 million of his contract, and then that offsets to where John's still getting the full amount of his deal, which is $47 million for this next year. He's still getting his $47 million. Instead, he's just getting $37 from the Rockets, and then he's getting $10 from whatever his new team is. So if you're out there looking at the NBA landscape, looking at teams that need potentially some veteran point guard help, John Wall could be that guy for any number of organizations. It's just about whether the organizations are in a position to offer just the absolute floor, a veteran minimum, or if they're willing to up the ante a little bit, go a little bit higher, go deeper into their pockets for, a taxpayer MLE or a non-taxpayer MLE, where they can suddenly kind of offset a little bit more of the money if you're the Houston Rockets. And that could make the Rockets more amenable to pursuing a buyout, right? Because if you're going to pursue a buyout with John Wall and you're either about to pay him $45 million to walk away from your team and do absolutely nothing, or you're only going to have to pay him $37 million. If the Rockets are able to shave off another $8 million from that, this entire ordeal with John Wall, him just sitting on the sidelines and doing nothing, then that's an absolute win for the Houston Rockets organization to walk away only paying him, sub $40 million instead of the entire $47 million that he's owed for this next season. So it's absolutely something to keep an eye on to see what teams are rumored that have interest in pursuing John Wall, possibly post buyout, and see what those teams look like from a financial perspective and whether or not they'll be able to commit a little bit more money to him, or if they're going to just kind of bide their time, wait and see when he hits the buyout market, because they're not willing to throw more than just the vet minimum at a guy that they haven't seen play essentially in like a year and a half. So that's the tough shake with John Wall. I'm expecting a buyout at some point, but I do think the Rockets are going to be smart and kind of wait and see what other teams are potentially going to pursue him so that they can try to offset some of that money as far as the buyout negotiations go. Now, there is a total curveball here, and it could just be John Wall is willing and ready to start playing again. Like, maybe he wants out and maybe he's willing to sacrifice some of that money from his $47 million contract. Maybe he's willing to sacrifice some of that just to get back to playing basketball. We know how badly John Wall's wanted to be back out there, and that he's even caused a stink or two trying to make his way back onto the court for the Houston Rockets. But at the end of the day, like, it's up to him, right? If he walks up and says, buy me out, give me $20 million and I'll leave. Like, I feel like the Rockets would absolutely take him up on that deal. You save $27 million? Hell yeah, we'll buy you out right now. Sign the paper. I don't know if there's an NBA precedent for a buyout of that, like, that caliber. I need to go back and look at some of the other, like, larger scale buyouts that have happened across NBA history to see if there's a precedent or not for that. But it is up to John Wall. Ultimately, if he wanted to just settle for $15 million of this current $47 million, he could do that. The ball is in his court. So, and with that, as that impacts the Houston Rockets and their rebuilding timeline, it's so important that they, essentially either let John Wall fall off the books or just buy him out, not taking back bad money, because the Rockets are poised to basically have Jalen Green, whoever the number 3 overall pick is, so we'll just say Paolo Banchero at this point, Alperen Sengun, like that, like collective of talent, top-end heavy talent for the Houston Rockets, plus the young core that they all have, right? Like, they've got those 3 guys locked down, team-friendly deals moving forward. 2 years under their belt each, 1 year under the belt of Paolo Banchero, rolling into summer 2023. And then you've got all the other young talent on this Rockets roster. Kevin Porter Jr. hitting restricted free agency. Jae'Sean Tate hitting restricted free agency. Josh Christopher, Usman Garuba, whoever they pick up with 17 and 26, potentially pick number 23 if they deal Eric Gordon for that, right? Like, they're going to have a huge amount of money to be able to spend to round out this roster with some significant veteran talent, or potentially an established star to bring into what is going to be an incredibly exciting situation for this Rockets team. And just when you look at the NBA landscape, just compared to other young upstart NBA teams, the Rockets are going to have one of the most desirable locations for a potential NBA free agent. And just like the DeAndre Ayton stuff this offseason, a lot of people had it pegged during the initial, like, contract discussion talks with Ayton. They were like, of course the Suns are going to do it. Like, he's talented. Like, it's going to happen. Like, they just made it to the finals. Why wouldn't you extend him? And here we are. So you never know what's going to happen at the NBA level, right? Things change so drastically that right now there could be a player that we just are operating under the guise of, oh yeah, that team's going to hold on to him for the long term, right? And suddenly a player could walk in free agency next summer, or hit restricted free agency, or whatever. And the Rockets could very much be in play with that, with just north of $70 million in cap space to play around with, which is an absurd number to think about. The Pistons are about to make a big splash with just $47 million in cap space, or 45, somewhere around there. The Rockets are going to have not quite double that amount, but 1.5 times that amount, which is just absolutely absurd to think about. So as far as navigating the rebuild, kind of making the right moves to steer this rebuild and be in a position to make a big splash in just about a year from now, the Rockets are in a great position. Rafael Stone has done a really solid job handling this, I think, to this point. And those are kind of final thoughts. I know that they weren't all super draft centric. I wanted to address the draft stuff kind of early in the episode, but of course, we're going to have a reaction to what takes place in the draft Thursday night. We'll have that up. It'll be late Thursday because the draft will happen, and then after the draft, Rafael Stone is going to speak to the media. So sometime late Thursday night, we'll have the draft reaction episode available, up and running. If it's not too late, it might just be pod side first, and then the YouTube side will drop a little bit later. But that's going to be it for today's episode. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google. Pardon me. Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Remember, for the house, for the team, for the algorithm. Let me know how you feel going into the NBA draft about Paolo Banchero becoming a Houston Rocket. Let me know if you're nervous. Let me know if you're excited. Let me know if you're calm. I want to hear your thoughts and feelings in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.